When my son mailed back the birthday gift I'd sent, along with a note that read, "You can't buy emotion, Mr. Jackson," I stood there in the hallway, the package still sealed, feeling like I'd been stabbed by a ghost I'd buried long ago. 3 days later, I was writing out my last will and testament, leaving everything I owned to a grandson I wasn't even allowed to meet. What happened next would drag my name through the dirt and resurrect a truth that had been buried for over 2 decades. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be erased from your own bloodline, this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, guilt, and forgiveness. Over the span of 20 years, I was painted as a deserter, a father who vanished. I let that narrative sit, rot, and grow teeth. But the truth? It never went away. And when I learned that my son had a child, a boy, who had no idea I even existed, I knew I had one last chance to break the curse before it spread to another generation. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when the truth is weaponized too late, and love arrives too late to fix what pride has broken. Before we dive into this brutal unraveling of what it means to be a father, subscribe and stay with me to the end. Because sometimes the most devastating betrayal isn't being hated, it's being forgotten. My name is Jackson D. Walker, and at 66, I wake up to silence most mornings. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question if you're still part of anyone's life story or just the footnote in someone else's grief. 35 years ago, I was the kind of man who thought building a real estate empire from scratch would mean something to the people I loved. My wife, Lorraine, was the heart of that home. She had a smile that could convince God to take Sundays off. We had a son, Ethan, born in the fall of '92. That boy was my whole damn world before it all collapsed. Lorraine passed away suddenly when Ethan was just 8 years old. Brain aneurysm. One moment, we were eating dinner. The next, I was watching a paramedic perform CPR on the kitchen floor. There's no guidebook for explaining death to a child, not when you're still figuring out how to breathe again yourself. I did the best I could, but grief and fatherhood don't always mix well. We both broke in different directions. The custody battle that followed was brutal. Lorraine's parents, staunch, old money types, filed emergency guardianship, citing emotional instability on my part. They had influence, and they used it. They didn't want Ethan raised by a man who didn't fit their mold, who didn't fold napkins the right way or bow to their polished legacy. And me? I was too tired and too broken to fight the way I should have. I settled for visitation every third weekend, which eventually became every other month. And then, nothing. Years bled into each other. I buried myself in work. Jackson and Harlan Realty grew to over 50 employees across 3 states. I made my first million before I turned 40. My company's slogan used to be, "We build more than homes, we build futures." It was bullshit, really. I could build futures for strangers, sure, but not for my own flesh and blood. Retirement came last spring, not by choice, but by necessity. High blood pressure, sciatica, and a heart that skipped beats whenever I climbed stairs. Suddenly, I had all this time, and no one to spend it with. The silence grew teeth. I started measuring days by what I could fix around the house, but you can only replace so many light bulbs before you realize you're just distracting yourself from the void. I tried reaching out to Ethan a few years ago, sent a Christmas card, even mailed a copy of an old photo of the 3 of us from Coney Island. No reply. Not even a returned envelope. It was like writing to a ghost. 3 months ago, I found out Ethan had turned 32. I remembered the date because it used to be circled on every calendar I owned. I sent him a watch. Nothing flashy, just an antique Hamilton my grandfather gave me with our initials engraved on the back. J-E-W. Jackson, Ethan, Walker. I thought maybe it would mean something. The package came back unopened, with a note in Ethan's handwriting clipped to the side. "You can't buy emotion, Mr. Jackson." He didn't even call me Dad. It's strange how a sentence with so few words can carry so much weight. It felt like getting sucker punched in the soul. I held that watch in my palm and just stared at it for an hour. It ticked like it didn't give a damn. I'm not looking for pity. I made mistakes. I know that. Maybe I didn't fight hard enough. Maybe I gave up when I should have clawed for custody like a lion protecting his cub. But I was grieving and broken and so damn tired of being told I wasn't enough, not classy enough, not stable enough, not Walker enough for them. But I'm not dead yet, and I'm not done. Something in me, call it regret or call it love, has been stirring lately. I want to try again. I want to see if maybe there's still a way back. Even if the door's just barely cracked open, I'll crawl through it. Because being a father doesn't stop when the courts say so. And being forgotten doesn't mean you stop remembering. The day I mailed that watch, I imagined a dozen different ways Ethan might respond. Maybe he'd call, say nothing at first, just breathe on the line. Maybe he'd text, "Thanks." Even just that, one word, would have cracked open the armor he'd worn for decades. I wasn't expecting reconciliation, just a flicker of acknowledgement, a signal from the void. I spent 2 weeks picking that watch. It wasn't about price. I wanted it to mean something. The Hamilton had been in our family since 1946. My grandfather wore it to his wedding. My father had it serviced every year like clockwork. I wore it the day Ethan was born. The initials engraved on the back, J-E-W, were never just letters to me. They were a timeline. Jackson, Ethan, Walker, a lineage carved into steel. I wrapped it myself. No store-bought box, just old-fashioned brown paper, hand-tied with navy ribbon. I tucked in a short letter, handwritten on the kind of thick linen paper people don't use anymore. "Happy birthday, Ethan. This belonged to your great-grandfather. I hope one day your son wears it too. Dad." I sent it through priority mail. 2-day delivery. Insured, tracked, and emotionally booby-trapped. 4 days passed. Nothing. Then a 5th. On the 6th day, I found the package on my doorstep. Tape still intact. My handwriting staring back at me like a mirror I didn't want to look into. There was a yellow sticky note attached, folded once. I unfolded it like it might explode. "You can't buy emotion, Mr. Jackson." That was all. No dear, no dad, no signature. I sat down on the stoop and read that note over and over, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something softer. They didn't. The way he addressed me, Mr. Jackson, as if I were some forgotten landlord or a substitute teacher he hated in 3rd grade. It wasn't even anger. It was distance. Cold, bureaucratic, surgical, like he was cutting out the tumor of me. I brought the package inside, poured a glass of whiskey, and stared at the watch on the counter. I didn't cry. I just felt small, like everything I had built, every dollar I had earned, every effort to reach out. It had all just collapsed under the weight of a single sentence. Later that night, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I dialed his number. The phone didn't ring. Just a chirpy robotic voice. The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this contact. Blocked. I called from the landline. Same result. I texted, Ethan, I understand if you're not ready. Just know I'm here when you are. Message undelivered. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, being ghosted by your own child. It doesn't scream. It just settles in, like mold in the walls. You start questioning your own memory. Was I that bad? Did I really disappear, or was I erased? I started second-guessing every moment from 30 years ago. The way I handled the funeral. The way I stopped visiting when they changed the schedule. The way I let fear and shame write silence into our lives. A week later, I took the watch back to the safe and locked it away. Not because I gave up, but because I knew it wasn't time. Maybe it never would be, but I couldn't shake the echo of that note. You can't buy emotion. No, you can't. But you can earn it. You can bleed for it. You can try. That's when I made a decision. I would stop pretending time heals all wounds. Time just buries them deeper. And sometimes, if you're lucky or foolish enough, you dig them up. Not to relive the pain, but to face it. Maybe even fix it. Even if the person on the other side wants nothing to do with you. Even if they call you Mr. Jackson. After the watch came back, I gave myself a week to mourn. Not for Ethan, but for the version of him I'd kept alive in my head. The one who'd open a door one day, not with a hug, but maybe with an awkward nod and a, "You hungry?" That fantasy died quietly, with no obituary. Just a sealed box on my kitchen table and a note that didn't even sting anymore, just throbbed. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote him a letter, not a text, not an email. A real, ink-on-paper letter, folded in thirds, tucked into an envelope, sealed with a stamp that had a blue jay on it. There was no pretense in that letter. No happy birthday, no hope you're well. Just truth. I told him I was sorry. I wrote that I wasn't proud of how I handled things when his mother died. That I had let the silence win. That I had tried to respect the court orders, his space, his grandparents' boundaries. But in doing so, I had erased myself. And maybe that erasure hurt him more than any words ever could have. I told him I missed him. I didn't beg. I didn't ask for visits or forgiveness. I just wanted him to know. I hadn't forgotten. I had never stopped thinking of him. Not one day in 30 years. I mailed the letter and waited. A week passed. Then 2. No reply. Not even a returned envelope this time. Just more of that damned silence. But silence is rarely neutral. It has a weight. It picks a side. By week 3, I couldn't take it. I needed to see him, even if it was just through glass, even if he turned his back. So I looked up his office address, Ethan Walker & Co. Architecture and design. Sleek name. Clean logo. Looked expensive. I put on my best blazer, the one Lorraine always said made me look like I still had somewhere to go. The receptionist was young, efficient, dressed like she might be managing a billion-dollar hedge fund between coffee orders. "Hi," I said. "I'm here to see Ethan Walker. I'm his father." She blinked once. Her hands didn't stop moving on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Walker isn't accepting walk-in visitors." "I'm not a client," I said. "This is personal." "I understand, sir, but I've been instructed not to let anyone through without an appointment." "Instructed," I repeated. "By Ethan?" She didn't answer. Just gave me that polite corporate smile, the kind that says this conversation is over and we both know it. "I won't take long," I said, voice softening. "Just 5 minutes." He doesn't even have to leave his desk. I'll wait in the lobby. I'm truly sorry. I can't help you. The words were rehearsed, not cruel, just final. I turned and walked out, my shoes clicking too loudly on the marble floor. When I reached the sidewalk, I realized I'd been holding my breath since I stepped into the building. I sat on a bench across the street, watching people come and go from his office. Young, confident, laughing. I imagined Ethan in there, maybe sipping espresso, reviewing floor plans, smiling with clients, smiling with everyone but me. That night, I sat in my recliner and stared at the ceiling fan. It made a low humming sound, like it was trying to whisper something I didn't want to hear. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe I had been a bad father, not abusive, not cruel, just absent. Maybe the kind of absence that grows fangs over time, the kind that mutates from hurt into hatred, from disappointment into dismissal. What kind of man lets 30 years pass without demanding to be let back in? Maybe I wasn't trying to fix anything now. Maybe I was just trying to rewrite the ending, reclaim a title I'd failed to earn. I didn't sleep that night, just kept hearing that receptionist's voice, soft but firm. I can't help you. Neither could I. There's a strange itch that grief leaves behind. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to look again. Check the corners. Open the boxes you've kept taped shut for decades. 3 days after I left Ethan's office, I found myself in the attic. Dust blanketed everything. Old tax records. Yellowed photo albums. A wedding dress Lorraine never wore. Our courthouse ceremony was too rushed. Then I saw it. A navy blue storage bin, lid slightly cracked, like even time couldn't fully seal it. Inside were files, old court papers, manila folders labeled in my handwriting, custody 1999, Walker vs. Walker, and a leather-bound notebook I hadn't touched since the day the gavel dropped. My heart tightened as I flipped through the pages. Every entry was a timestamp of collapse. April 3rd, 1999. Lorraine's parents filed for emergency custody. April 17th. First court hearing. Her father's lawyer used my military record against me, said I was volatile, unfit. May 2nd. Temporary restraining order. No contact with Ethan until court resolution. June 15th. Accusation filed. Emotional abuse and inappropriate behavior. My fingers trembled as I read that last line. I remembered sitting in that courtroom, wearing my best gray suit, sweating through the collar, while strangers debated my worth as a father. The accusations had come from Lorraine's sister, Diane. She said Ethan had nightmares after our weekend visits, that he was withdrawn, that I yelled too much. She painted me as a ticking time bomb with a short fuse and a long military resume. A man broken by war, incapable of love. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when fear walks into a courtroom wearing pearls and carrying a family name with real estate in 3 states. Then I saw it. Tucked between legal documents and custody schedules was a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, with my name written in Lorraine's handwriting. Jackson. No, dear. No love. Just my name. The seal cracked like old bones when I opened it. The letter was short. If you're reading this, it means you've survived what they tried to do to you. If you ever clear your name, promise me one thing. Tell Ethan the truth. Tell him why you left. He deserves to know. Don't let them twist you into the villain. L. I sat there on the attic floor for nearly an hour, reading those lines again and again. She had known. Lorraine knew I wasn't guilty. She just didn't have the strength or maybe the leverage, to fight her family. That letter had been written during the custody proceedings. She never gave it to the court, never gave it to me. Just buried it with the rest of our wreckage. Beneath the letter was a document I hadn't looked at in years. State of New York, Family Court, case dismissed, all allegations unsubstantiated. The case had collapsed after a child psychologist testified that Ethan showed no signs of abuse, emotional or otherwise. Diane's testimony fell apart under cross-examination, but the damage had already been done. The restraining order stayed. The relationship fractured. By the time I was cleared, Ethan was almost 11. And by then, he already believed I was the monster they said I was. No one told him otherwise. Not his grandparents, not Diane, and certainly not me. I was so ashamed, even vindicated. I felt dirty. Like clearing my name came too late to clean the stain. I chose silence. I convinced myself it was better that way. That if I stayed away, he'd grow up with peace, even if it meant growing up without me. But now, staring at Lorraine's letter, something changed. This wasn't just about guilt anymore. It was about truth. About a boy who had been handed a version of his father written by people who hated that father's blood, his roots, his lack of pedigree. I had let them write that version. I hadn't fought hard enough to revise it. Now, my grandson, whoever he was, wherever he lived, might grow up believing the same damn lie. And that I couldn't accept. I stood up from the attic floor, the letter trembling in my hand. I didn't know what I'd do next. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't be silent anymore. The truth, once uncovered, doesn't rest quietly. It paces, it growls, it claws at the back of your throat until you do something about it. I spent the next morning nursing a bitter cup of coffee, Lorraine's letter open on the table beside me like a sacred text. The dismissed court order lay next to it, brittle from time but loud with meaning. I hadn't slept, and my hands trembled, not from age or caffeine, but from a flood of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. So I searched. I'd never been much of a tech guy, but Google's still a friend to the forgotten. I typed in, Ethan Walker Architect, New York. And there he was. A sleek company website, staff bios, awards, press. He looked older, sharper. Same jawline as Lorraine, same eyes as mine. And then, almost accidentally, I clicked on a local lifestyle article featuring a charity fundraiser. Ethan was on stage, speaking at a podium. Standing beside him was a woman I didn't recognize, holding a child. The caption read, Ethan Walker with wife Abigail and their son Mason. 5. Supporting the Build, a Brighter Future Foundation. 5. My chest tightened as I zoomed in on the photo. Mason. A name I had never heard. A face I had never seen. A grandson I didn't know existed. My finger hovered over the screen, tracing his smile. He looked like Ethan at that age. Bright eyes, slightly too long hair. A grin that said trouble and wonder all at once. And I had never even heard his name. The realization stung more than I expected. It wasn't just that I was excluded. It was that I was erased. As if I had never existed. As if my branch on the family tree had been cut off, burned, and buried. The next day, I found myself sitting in my car outside a preschool on the Upper West Side. I'd called earlier, pretending to be interested in enrolling a future grandchild. The receptionist was kind, said I could swing by to observe the campus. That was all I needed. I parked across the street and watched. 15 minutes in, they came out, classroom door swinging open, kids pouring onto the playground. I spotted him instantly. Mason, wearing a puffy blue jacket, holding a red plastic shovel, and marching straight toward a sandbox like it owed him money. He looked alive, whole, unscarred by the bitterness that had hardened his father. And for a moment, just a breath of a second, I let myself imagine walking up, kneeling down, and saying, "Hi, I'm your grandfather." But fantasies don't last long in the real world, because right then, I heard a voice that stopped me cold. "What the hell are you doing here?" I turned. Ethan. He stood behind my car, arms crossed, jaw clenched, rage smoldering behind his eyes. I got out slowly, my hands up like I was surrendering to a crime I didn't commit. "I just wanted to see him," I said quietly. "Just once." "You think this is okay?" he hissed. "Showing up at his school? Watching from a car like some creep?" I wasn't going to approach him, I said. He's my grandson." "No," he snapped. "He's my son, and he doesn't need you screwing him up like you screwed me up." I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. "You don't get to waltz back into our lives because you had a sentimental moment over some dusty papers. You left, remember? You disappeared." "I didn't leave," I said. "They took you from me. I fought. I was cleared." "Too little, too late," he barked. "You're a ghost, Jackson, and ghosts don't get visitation rights." He turned, walked away. I stood there, breathless, watching him scoop Mason up from the sandbox, tuck him close like a precious thing in danger. He didn't look back. I stayed until they disappeared behind the glass doors. And then I drove home, slower than I ever had. Because there's nothing heavier than being alive while someone else pretends you're dead. The drive home felt longer than it should have, though I'd taken the same route for years. Maybe it was the weight in my chest, or the silence, or the look in Ethan's eyes when he said it. I don't want that child growing up with someone like you in his life. He didn't yell it. That's what made it worse. He said it like a fact, like a diagnosis, a final judgment passed down without trial. It played on repeat in my head the whole way home. Someone like you, as if I was a disease. By the time I reached my house, it was dusk. The kind of soft, melancholy light that makes even the trees look tired. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at my own reflection in the darkened window. Lorraine's letter was still there. The custody file. The watch. I spread them out like evidence, like maybe if I looked at them all at once, the pain would explain itself. It didn't. I poured myself a drink, just one, then another. Then I stopped counting. The silence in the house grew thicker, heavier, pressing into my temples like a vice. Somewhere between the third and fourth glass, I opened a drawer and pulled out the old .38. I hadn't touched in years. Still loaded, still registered. I walked to the study and sat down in the leather armchair Lorraine used to love. Everything in my body felt hollow. There was no rage, no drama, just an absence, a cold, cavernous space where hope used to live. I tried, I whispered. I did everything I could. I closed my eyes. My thumb found the safety. Then the doorbell rang. Once, then twice, then again, louder. I ignored it. Whoever it was, they'd go away. But they didn't. A few seconds later, the front door opened. I'd forgotten to lock it. I heard slow, heavy footsteps. "Jackson?" a voice called. Male, old. I opened my eyes. Standing in the doorway was a man I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Walter Jennings. A retired postman I used to talk with every morning at the corner cafe before it shut down. He looked older now, his hair fully white, but the warmth in his eyes hadn't changed. "I rang," he said softly. "Your porch light was off. Thought something might be wrong." I said nothing. He glanced down at the revolver in my hand, and without hesitation, he stepped forward, knelt beside the chair, and gently took it from me. He didn't lecture, didn't panic, just set it quietly on the desk. Then he looked at me, really looked. "I've seen that look before," he said, "in Korea, in the eyes of good men who thought their story had ended too early." Still, I said nothing. "You remember that winter," he continued, "when my wife died and I couldn't pay for the furnace repair?" I blinked, slowly nodded. "You covered the cost, quietly, never told a soul. You didn't even know me that well." "It was nothing," I mumbled. "It was everything," he said. "That heat kept me alive. Now I'm here to return the favor." He sat beside me, hands resting on his knees. "I don't know what brought you to this point," he said, "but I do know this. Whatever they think of you, whatever they believe, you still get to decide who you are, every damn day." I looked away, ashamed. "They won't forgive me." "Maybe not," he said, "but forgiveness isn't the goal. Truth is, dignity is. You live for that, for the part of you that knows who you are, even if they never see it." We sat in silence for a long while. Finally, I whispered, "I'm so tired, Walter." "I know," he said gently, "but not done. Not yet." He helped me up, took the gun with him when he left. That night, I didn't drink again. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the fan spin as if the world hadn't completely closed in. Because maybe it hadn't. Maybe one man's belief in you, just one, was enough to keep you breathing one more day. I'd told myself I was done, that I'd put the gun away for good, that I wouldn't reach out again, wouldn't chase what clearly didn't want to be caught. But the next week, I saw it. An online flyer shared through a community events group. "Join us in celebrating Mason Walker's 6th birthday. Saturday, 2 p.m., Sugar Hill Lane." The address was Ethan's house. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew it wasn't meant for me. It was posted as part of a neighborhood block invite. But something about seeing it out in the open, with balloons and cartoon tigers on the border, made it feel like a window. Maybe not a door, but a crack in the wall. I bought a gift. A set of wooden trains, just like the ones Ethan used to play with. Well-made, hand-painted, the kind that lasted generations. I wrote a card too. Simple. "Happy birthday, Mason. I hope this brings you as much joy as it once brought your dad. Jay." I didn't dress up this time. No suit, no tie. Just a clean shirt and slacks. I didn't want to show up like a salesman. I wanted to show up like a grandfather. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing. Balloons strung up along the gate. Laughter spilling from the backyard. Tables lined with cupcakes, juice boxes, and little blue gift bags. I never made it past the front gate. Before I could ring the bell, a woman opened the door. Not Abigail, not Ethan. Someone I didn't know. She looked at me, puzzled, and I introduced myself. "Jackson Walker. I'm here for Mason's birthday." She stepped back. "Let me get Ethan." Minutes passed. Then he came, walking through the yard, around the house, out the gate. He didn't say a word, just stood there, blocking the entrance like a bouncer at a club no one wants to get into. I held up the gift. "I'm not here to make a scene." "You already are," he said flatly. "It's just a birthday present." "You think showing up uninvited to my son's birthday is some kind of breakthrough?" I stayed calm, I saw the flyer online. I thought maybe... You thought wrong, he cut in. You don't belong here. I took a breath. You don't have to let me in. Just give this to him. That's all I ask. He looked at the package, then back at me. I don't want him confused, he said. I don't want him wondering why some old man he's never met is suddenly dropping toys at his door. I swallowed. You could explain it. No, I won't. There were voices behind him now. Laughter slowing. One of the kids peeked through the fence. Another adult stepped outside, curious. Please, I said softly. Just the gift. Go home, Jackson. I felt the weight in my arms, the box trembling slightly. Then I heard a voice from across the street. Hey, is everything okay? A neighbor. Phone in hand. Ethan turned, annoyed. It's fine. But the man didn't leave. He kept filming. I saw him pan the camera, capturing me. An old man holding a wrapped box, standing alone outside his son's house, rejected. Then Ethan reached out and pushed the gate shut between us. Not hard, not aggressive, but final. The latch clicked, and I was on the outside again. I stood there for a moment longer, just me and the silence. Then I turned and walked away, the gift still in my hands. I didn't cry until I reached the car. The next morning, I was viral. The video hit 1 million views in under 24 hours. Elderly father rejected at grandson's birthday. Where's the line between boundaries and cruelty? Comment sections exploded. Some defended Ethan. You don't know the full story. Others attacked him. Heartless. Cold. Unforgivable. But none of them knew the truth. Not about Lorraine. Not about the court. Not about Diane's lies. Not about the letter in my attic. And none of them knew the weight of carrying a gift meant for a child who didn't know you existed. I didn't respond. Didn't comment. Didn't defend myself. What was there to say? The internet loves heartbreak, but it doesn't heal it. 3 days after the video went viral, I deleted my social media accounts. I hadn't even known I had followers. Apparently, a distant cousin had tagged me in the original post. My inbox filled up with pity, judgment, and unsolicited therapy recommendations. People wanted to talk. People wanted to dissect, but none of them wanted to listen. So I shut it all down. Then I opened the closet, the one in the back room, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were remnants of a life paused mid-sentence, photo albums, Lorraine's scarves, a baby blanket with Ethan's name embroidered across one corner in fading thread. I took each piece out, slowly, and laid it on the floor. Then I lit a fire. Not out of anger, but necessity. I burned it all. Every picture, every note, every keepsake. I didn't cry, didn't hesitate. Some people think grief ends in tears. Sometimes it ends in silence, smoke, and a match you don't regret striking. I kept only 2 things, Lorraine's letter and the court file. Because I wasn't erasing the past, I was editing it. And if I wanted to write a new ending, I had to start with truth. So I opened the folder. Inside was every legal document from the case. Affidavits, transcripts, the psychologist's evaluation. Most damning and most redemptive was the judge's final ruling. Allegations unsubstantiated, no evidence of abuse. Custody denied due to petition timing, not guilt. I read those lines over and over, not for comfort, but clarity. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. I had been cleared. Legally, ethically, even morally. The only court I'd never stood in was my son's. That's the one that had sentenced me without appeal. Until now. I called an old contact, Carla Wexler, a journalist I'd sold a commercial property to 15 years ago. She owed me a favor, and I was ready to collect. We met at a diner near the river. I brought the court documents, Lorraine's letter, and the photo of Ethan and me at Coney Island. The one I used to keep in my wallet, even after the leather cracked and the ink faded. "I'm not here for sympathy," I told her. "I want a record, a story, not about the birthday party or the video, about what led to it. The whole damn truth." Carla nodded, scanning the pages. "I can't promise a redemption arc," she said. "I don't need redemption," I replied. "I need reality." She agreed to help, said she'd pitch the story to a podcast she worked with now. Family Fault Lines. Niche, but growing. They loved multi-layered stories, especially ones with legal tangles and emotional scars. When I got home that night, I sat down at my desk and began organizing the files chronologically, each document in its own folder. I used highlighters, yellow for legal findings, blue for psychological evaluations, green for personal letters and testimony. I wasn't just preparing for a podcast. I was preparing for battle, but not the kind with shouting and lawsuits. The kind fought with dignity. I wasn't going to smear Ethan. I wasn't going to dig into his mistakes or air his dirty laundry. I wasn't going to call Abigail or confront neighbors. I was going to tell my story, start to finish, with evidence, with grace. If the world wanted to judge me, so be it. But this time, they judged me with facts in front of them. This time, I wouldn't be silent. That night, as I filed the last folder into a leather case, I felt something shift inside me. Not closure, not peace, but purpose. The kind of purpose that doesn't need applause. The kind that walks straight through fire, then builds something out of the ashes. I wrote the letter on the same desk where I signed the mortgage to our first house. The same desk where I once sat with Ethan on my lap, helping him draw a crooked crayon dog that he insisted was a dinosaur. I used heavy ivory paper. Not because I thought it would impress him, but because truth deserves a certain kind of weight. I didn't draft it on a computer. No edits, no backspaces, just ink and intention. I wrote slowly, with hands that had built homes and held nothing in return for far too long. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I finally stopped trying to show up at the wrong door and decided to knock on the one that matters most, your memory. This isn't a plea. It's not an apology dressed in guilt. It's a record, one I should have shared long ago. And for that delay, I am sorry. You were 8 when your mother died. I was 35, and for the first time in my life, completely powerless. Lorraine was the anchor of our family, and without her, I drifted. I wasn't strong. I wasn't wise. And I wasn't fast enough to stop what came next. Her parents, your grandparents, were grieving too. But their grief had teeth. They took me to court. They told lies. They said I was unstable. Then your Aunt Diane stepped in with something sharper. Accusations. They claimed I'd hurt you, that I yelled too much, that I left you scared, that I made you have nightmares. None of it was true. There was an investigation. A child psychologist interviewed you. You didn't say I scared you. You didn't say I hurt you. But the fear planted in the courtroom had already taken root. A judge dismissed the case. All allegations unsubstantiated. But by then, the court had already decided you'd be better off with them. I was granted no custody. Visitation became supervised, then restricted, then disappeared entirely. And I let it happen. Not because I didn't love you, but because I thought silence would protect you. because I believed, stupidly, that if I stepped back, they'd step up. That if I vanished, you might find peace. I didn't want you to grow up caught in a tug of war between blood and resentment. I see now what that silence cost us. I failed to tell you who I really was. I let their version of me harden in your mind like cement. And I know that to you, I'm a ghost. Worse than that, a wound. I've written this letter not to redeem myself. I've made peace with the possibility that you may never forgive me. That's your right, but I ask you this. Don't let that same silence infect the next generation. You have a son, Mason. He deserves a full picture of where he came from. Not just my name, but the truth behind it. One day, he'll ask questions. Maybe about the man who wasn't at his birthdays. The man who sent gifts he never got. The man who stood at the gate, waiting, while everyone else clapped inside. When that day comes, tell him what you will. But if you can, tell him also that I tried. That I loved. That I was far from perfect, but never absent by choice. Tell him that the pain between father and son doesn't have to pass down like an heirloom. If you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But don't pass the bitterness on to him. Don't teach him to erase someone just because he doesn't understand the whole story yet. Let him write his own. With whatever time I have left, I will not show up again. I won't knock. I won't call. This is my last message. But the door will always stay open. Whether you ever walk through it or not, that choice is yours. With more love than time can explain. Dad. I folded the letter, slid it into an envelope. No return address. Then I walked 3 blocks to the post office and mailed it with certified tracking. And when I got home, for the first time in a long while, I sat down, not with guilt, not with desperation, but with something closer to release. Because now the truth had legs, and maybe, just maybe, it would find its way home. There's a certain clarity that comes after you've said everything. No more justifying, no more hoping, just stillness. And with stillness comes decision. I spent the morning after mailing the letter walking through my house, room by room. Not as a resident, but as a man taking inventory of what would be left behind. A life reduced to assets. A legacy reduced to paperwork. I had no delusions about reconciliation. If Ethan never responded, so be it. But Mason, he was still untouched by the war, still blank in all the right places. If I couldn't be a part of his present, I'd do everything I could to shape his future. So I made an appointment with my lawyer. Sandra Berkowitz had handled my legal affairs for over 20 years. Wills, property transfers, contracts. She knew discretion. More importantly, she knew my history. When I arrived, she greeted me with that gentle firmness only seasoned attorneys possess. I was wondering when I'd see you again, she said, leading me into her office. I need to revise my will, I said. Effectively, rewrite it from scratch. Everything still going to Ethan? I shook my head. No, it's going to Mason, my grandson. Her pen stopped mid-note. Does Ethan know? He will, I said. I'm sending him a copy. Sandra leaned back. You sure about this? More than anything I've ever been sure of. We spent 2 hours crafting the document. Every account, every asset, every piece of property, all designated to Mason Walker, to be released in full when he turned 18. Until then, placed in a managed trust under a third-party fiduciary. No loopholes, no room for contestation. I added a stipulation. Mason had to read a sealed letter from me before the trust could be unlocked. Not for manipulation, just for context. just for truth. By the time I left Sandra's office, the sun had begun to dip behind the skyline. I felt lighter, but not free. This wasn't closure. It was planting a seed I'd never lived to see bloom. 2 days later, I mailed a copy of the updated will and a formal letter to Ethan. No personal note this time. No appeal. Just an envelope with his name, the legal documents inside, and one sentence handwritten at the bottom of the last page. Mason has the right to know who his grandfather was. No signature. No farewell. Just fact. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't track the delivery. Instead, I spent the evening boxing up things I thought Mason might want someday. Old family photos, Lorraine's journals, the watch. I labeled each box with a year. For Mason, age 18. For Mason, age 25. And so on. I knew I couldn't give him presents, but I could give him pieces. Pieces of a man he'd never really know, but who'd fought hard, quietly, to leave him something more than silence. The next morning, I made one more call to a local nonprofit that provided mentorship for children who'd lost grandparents to estrangement or death. I offered to fund 5 scholarships in Mason's name. Anonymous donor, I told them. The woman on the phone paused. Would you at least like to write a dedication? Yes, I said. Just 5 words. She waited. Tell them he tried anyway. That night, I sat alone on my porch, a mug of tea in my hands, the wind rustling through the leaves like distant applause. Maybe one day Mason would stand in this house. Maybe he'd hold the watch, read the letter, look at the photos. Maybe he'd ask questions. And maybe, just maybe, he'd understand that legacy isn't about blood or inheritance or holiday dinners. It's about what you build when no one's watching, and who you build it for. The invitation came 3 days after Sandra finalized the will. It was from a young podcast producer named Lila Harrow. She'd gotten my name from Carla Wexler, the journalist I'd met weeks earlier. Carla had apparently shared my court documents and Lorraine's letter, off the record, with Lila, who ran a series called The Misjudged. I knew the title before I read the rest. Lila's email was short, respectful. She wasn't after drama. She wanted stories where public perception had collided with private truth. Family estrangement, legal failures, silent wars behind closed doors. She ended her note with, "We don't do exposés, we do perspective." That line stayed with me. I agreed. The studio was in Brooklyn, a modest space tucked above a vintage bookshop. Lila greeted me like I was already part of something important. She was young, no older than 30, but carried herself with the urgency of someone who'd seen what silence could do to people. We recorded the interview in one sitting. No edits, no retakes, just 2 hours of conversation. I told her everything about Lorraine's death, the custody battle, the accusation from Diane, the restraining orders, the eventual dismissal, the silence, the attempts to reconnect, the watch, the note, the birthday party, the video, and finally, the will. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When it was over, she said, "This might be the most devastatingly quiet story we've ever recorded." I didn't know what to say. She added, "People need to hear it." The episode aired 2 weeks later, titled The Man at the Gate. It opened with ambient audio, children laughing in the distance, a man's footsteps on gravel, the faint sound of a gate clicking shut. Then came my voice. The first line, "They told him I left. They never told him I was pushed." Within 24 hours, the episode hit 500,000 plays. By the end of the week, 2.7 million. Listeners flooded the comments section. Messages poured in. From estranged parents, from children who'd cut ties, from people who saw their own families in my mistakes and Ethan's anger. Some were harsh. Where was he for 30 years? Others were hopeful. This broke me. I need to call my father. A few were angry. He was cleared, and they still kept his son from him? That's not protection. That's punishment. But most were quiet acknowledgments of pain. I never knew how much silence could hurt until I heard this. The story made its way across platforms. Twitter threads dissected the legal implications. Reddit debated generational trauma. A Facebook group formed, titled Fathers We Never Knew, sharing letters that were never sent. And then quietly, Ethan began hearing about it. I know because Carla told me. A friend of his, another architect, reached out to her. Said Ethan looked shell-shocked after listening. I imagined him in his office, headphones in, hearing my voice after all these years. Not angry, not begging, just explaining. Carla said he hadn't responded publicly, but he'd listened to the entire thing. That was enough. I didn't expect a call. I didn't want a headline. I didn't even want redemption. I just wanted him to hear me without interruption. And for the first time, he had. A week later, I received a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a photo. Ethan, as a child, sitting on my lap at Coney Island, holding a stuffed bear. Tucked behind the frame was a sticky note. I remember this day. No signature. No message. Just that. I placed the photo on my mantle, beside Lorraine's letter and Mason's unopened birthday gift. Public vindication is a strange thing. It doesn't heal. It doesn't restore. But it does something subtler. It rebalances the scales. Not in court, not in family, in the mirror. And sometimes, that's the only verdict that counts. Ethan listened to the podcast alone, sometime after midnight, with the lights off and his laptop screen the only glow in the room. Abigail had gone to bed early. Mason was already asleep. The silence in the house was usually comforting, but tonight it felt invasive. He hadn't planned to listen. One of his colleagues at work had mentioned the episode. "Isn't that your dad?" someone asked casually. He'd brushed it off. But the name, the man at the gate, kept echoing in his head. Eventually, curiosity won. He pressed play and heard his father's voice for the first time in years. Not filtered through childhood memory or bitter assumptions, just raw, unpolished, steady, older, but still familiar. The more he listened, the tighter his chest grew. There were parts that struck him like thunder. When Lorraine died, I didn't know how to be anything except broken. They said I scared you, but no one asked me what scared me. Losing you. I let the silence grow because I thought it would keep you safe. He paused it halfway through, got up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water he never drank, then sat down again. He listened to the rest in one sitting. By the end, he wasn't angry. He was empty. Not because the story was false, but because it wasn't. The next morning, he went to the storage box in the back of the closet. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were court papers, letters from his grandparents, and one sealed envelope with his mother's handwriting. He remembered it vaguely. Something he was told to keep, but never read. "For when you're older," Diane had said. He opened it with shaking hands. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you're old enough to question the stories you've been told. I hope you're brave enough to find your own. Your father didn't abandon you. He was pushed away, legally and emotionally. I didn't stop it. I was scared too, of losing you, of losing the support we had. But I never stopped believing in his love for you. He's not perfect, but he's not the villain. Forgive me for not speaking sooner. Forgive us both if you can. Love always, Mom. He read the letter 3 times. Each word carved a deeper groove in his chest. Then he picked up the court file, page after page of testimony, expert statements, judicial rulings. The truth stared back at him in black and white, unsubstantiated. No evidence of abuse. Custody denied due to procedural delay, not misconduct. For over 2 decades, Ethan had clung to a version of his father fed to him through whispers, tension, and carefully curated silence. He had believed absence was abandonment. He had believed indifference had a name, Jackson Walker. And now he saw what it really was. Sacrifice. Flawed. Clumsy. Too late. But still, sacrifice. He sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. Mason woke first, padding into the room with sleepy eyes and bedhead. "Daddy, can I have cereal?" Ethan nodded absently, grabbing the box and milk. But his eyes stayed on his son. Mason had no idea how much history he carried in his DNA. And Ethan, he finally understood that the silence he'd inherited could become the silence Mason would live with if he wasn't careful. Later that day, he called Abigail into the room. He handed her the letter, then the court file, then said softly, "I need to tell you something." And for the first time, he told the full story, not the version his grandparents told him, not the edited one he told himself, the real one. And when he finished, Abigail didn't speak. She just reached out, took his hand, and nodded. Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon writing an email. It wasn't long. It wasn't poetic. It was simple. "I read the letter. I listened. I see it now. I don't know what happens next, but thank you for not giving up completely." He didn't click send. Not yet. Instead, he printed it, folded it, slipped it into an envelope, and handed it to Mason. "Can you do me a favor, bud?" he asked. Mason nodded. "When you see Grandpa Jackson, give him this." Mason smiled, not fully understanding, but Ethan did. And that shift, that quiet, irreversible shift, was enough to break a cycle 2 generations deep. It was late October when it happened, one of those crisp autumn afternoons when the wind carries the scent of burning leaves and something softer underneath, like memory. Jackson was in the kitchen, peeling apples for a pie he probably wouldn't finish. The radio murmured jazz in the background, low and unobtrusive. Outside, the trees had surrendered to gold and rust. The world looked tired but peaceful. Then came the knock. 3 soft raps, not hurried, not hesitant, just present. He wiped his hands on a towel and made his way to the front door. Through the frosted glass, he saw a small silhouette. When he opened it, there stood a boy, maybe 6 years old, jacket zipped up to his chin, sneakers too clean to belong to a kid who played hard. In his hand was an envelope. "Hi," the boy said, voice high and clear. "Are you Mr. Jackson?" Jackson nodded slowly, kneeling down so they were eye level. "I'm Mason," the boy said. "Mom said I could come meet my grandpa today. Dad's in the car." Jackson looked past him. A black sedan sat parked at the curb. The engine was still running. In the driver's seat, Ethan stared straight ahead. Not at Jackson. Not away from him. Just still. The old man turned back to the boy. "Well," he said, voice catching slightly, "I've been waiting a long time to meet you, Mason." Mason grinned and handed him the envelope. "Dad said this is for you." Jackson took it, but didn't open it right away. Instead, he stepped aside. "You want to come in?" Mason hesitated, then nodded and stepped over the threshold. They sat at the kitchen table. Jackson poured Mason a glass of apple juice. They talked about school, about dinosaurs, about how Mason wanted to be a firefighter, but only the kind that also flies planes. Jackson listened, really listened. No agenda, no pressure. Just a man meeting his grandson for the very first time. After a while, Mason asked, "Why didn't we know each other before?" Jackson looked at the boy carefully. "That's a long story," he said. "But the short version is, sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big ones, and it takes time to fix them." Mason seemed to accept that. Kids often do. Then Jackson glanced at the envelope again and finally opened it. Inside was the note Ethan had written days before. "I read the letter. I listened. I see it now. I don't know what happens next. But thank you for not giving up completely." Jackson folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Is it from Dad?" Mason asked. "Yes," Jackson said softly. "What did he say?" "He said, he sees me now, and that's enough." They finished the juice. Jackson gave Mason the wooden train set he'd been saving for over a year. When it was time to go, Mason hugged him without being asked. "Will I see you again?" he said. Jackson smiled. "If your parents say yes, then absolutely." Mason waved and ran toward the car. Ethan stepped out when the boy was safely buckled in. He walked halfway to the porch. Not all the way, just enough. For a moment, the two men stood in silence. No apology, no explanation, just presence. And for Jackson, that was everything. Ethan gave a small nod. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. Then he turned and got in the car. As the vehicle pulled away, Jackson stood on the porch with the envelope in one hand and a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in decades. Reconnection doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a quiet knock, and a child who still believes introductions are worth making, even late ones. Jackson didn't expect the visits to become routine, but over the next few months, Mason came by once a week. Sometimes with Abigail, sometimes just dropped off for an hour while Ethan ran errands. They never talked about the podcast, never talked about the will, never talked about the decades lost, but they talked about trains, about how to make the perfect grilled cheese, about how Lorraine once made Halloween costumes by hand, sewing until her fingers ached. Jackson showed Mason photos, not to prove anything, not to reclaim his place, but to offer a bridge, to show the boy that life didn't start with absence and didn't have to end in it either. One afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of snow, Mason asked, "What was my dad like when he was little?" Jackson smiled, poured another cup of tea. He was quiet, thoughtful. He used to line up his toys by color and name every one of them. "Even the dinosaurs? Especially the dinosaurs." Mason laughed. And just like that, the wall cracked a little more. Jackson never asked Ethan for more time, never pushed for explanations. He didn't want resolution that came out of guilt. He wanted honesty that came from legacy. One night, Mason curled up on the couch beside him, clutching a blanket. The boy looked up and asked, "Why did everyone think you were gone?" Jackson looked at the flickering fireplace, the shadows dancing across the floor. "Because I let them," he said softly. "Sometimes, when people say you're not wanted, it's easier to believe them than to fight." "Why didn't you fight?" "I tried, but not hard enough." And when I finally tried again, too much time had passed. Mason frowned, clearly turning the idea over in his head. Do you hate my dad? Jackson turned to him. No, never. Does he hate you? There was a pause. I think he used to. Or maybe not hate, just didn't understand. And when you don't understand something for a long time, you fill in the blanks with pain. Mason leaned his head against Jackson's arm. I'm glad I get to know you. Jackson closed his eyes, letting that simple sentence settle deeper than any apology ever could. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need a reunion wrapped in tears or cinematic embraces. He just needed this. A boy beside him, a new story forming. On Thanksgiving, Ethan came inside for the first time. No handshake, no grand declarations, just a casserole dish and a quiet, Mason forgot his scarf. They ate together. Small talk, weather, work, nothing deep. But as Ethan left, he paused at the doorway. He talks about you a lot, you know, he said. Draws pictures of trains with your name on the side. Jackson nodded. He's a good kid. Ethan looked at him. Really looked, then gave a short nod. I don't know what this is yet, he said, but thank you for not forcing it. You don't owe me anything, Jackson said. I know, Ethan replied. That's what makes it easier. When the door closed behind him, Jackson sat back in his chair, letting the warmth of the moment linger. He didn't get back the years. He didn't erase the silence. But he rewrote what came next. He found peace not in forgiveness, but in telling the truth, in showing up, in staying. And sometimes, that's all redemption really is. Blood doesn't guarantee love. But truth, it can build something that blood alone never could.